Good evening. What is good, everybody? We are back, and today we have Worldwide Z is really what I'm trying to call her. Look, you just
I
came
appreciate
from
that.
a whole excursion
I
across
know.
the world, and well, Dubai, maybe some France, maybe some Europe. I don't know where you were.
I was in Dubai for a little bit. I think the crazy part was I was in Dubai on a camel, and that was the second camel I had ridden this year. And I
For
was like,
real?
yes, because I rode camels in Cabo, in Mexico in June.
Ah,
So I will say, I mean, I'll give myself that nickname for this year. It's been a lot.
Worldwide Z.
We outside was
We,
my
hey,
theme.
that was the theme of 2021 for
Right.
sure. We outside. No, I love it. Shoot, let me just introduce you real quick. For those of you guys who may not know who Zena is, well, you should. Not only are you Ivy League, not only are you, former basketball player, you also, worked in the NFL, you worked in the NBA. Now you're with a major publication while doing sideline reporting, while getting your travel in. Wow, by the way, aren't you like on the board for your graduate school?
I am. I
Well,
am
look,
on the
you just
board of
over here doing
interest.
everything, and it's honestly like you're one of those people who I watch from a distance. I check out your IG stories, and I just root for you from afar,
Thank
and I'm just like,
you.
yeah, go, like, just go get it, go take
Thank
over.
you.
But
I feel the same with you. I feel the same
yeah,
with you. You've been inspiring me since I met you.
whenever we met, I think we were doing an event down in somewhere in South Florida, and
Mhm.
you sat behind, like we were getting on buses. You sat behind me on the bus. We introduced ourselves, and you were like, "Oh, your name is Eve. My sister's name is Eve." I was like, "Yo, don't tell me that reminds you of your sister." Like, so.
I know, but that's crazy. You remember that? Like that just hit me like a very clear memory now. Yes, I definitely said that. Oh my God, Eve, just like my sister, but you're like Eve Saint Laurent. I was like, oh God, okay, that makes sense. Mine is
Yeah,
E, but yes, that's so crazy.
exactly,
Good memory.
exactly. But you also have you have a silent letter in your name too, right?
Yeah, so interesting. I'm actually looking into dropping it. Like
Oh, for real?
permanently dropping it. Because so as you mentioned, I just started doing sideline reporting and they were asking me like, what's going to be my name on the bottom ticker, right? And I was like, if it's Xena with the B, no one's
Yeah,
going to understand like the in-depth richness as to why it's there, but
yeah.
why we don't pronounce it, which is part of what the conversation we're going to have today is. But I was like, I don't know. I feel like I might just drop it because my mom doesn't even type my name with the B anymore. My
Oh,
sister doesn't.
really?
Yeah, no one uses the B anymore.
Hmm.
It's just, I think it's easier and it makes more sense because no one pronounces it, whether it's in
Right.
French or in English. So I am actually looking into dropping it. But yes, I have a silent B at the end of my name. And that's why my nickname since I was in high school, middle school, has been Xena B.
Gotcha. Okay,
Mhm.
I didn't know that, but
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Look, I'm one of those people with a silent letter in their names too, and everybody wants
Right.
to say the S at the end, but I'm like, look,
Yibis.
yeah, but I can't take it out. I can't ever take it out. Just for the simple fact, I'm like, look, you got to be cultured if you gonna talk to me.
Right. That's real.
You
That's
feel
real.
me? No, but look, the reason why I really wanted you on here is because, as my book has been released, or it's depending on when you're listening to this podcast, either coming out or you have already attained a copy of it. But Immigrant American, living an American life with African perspectives, and I want to just touch on a few of the topics that I talk about in this book. And I think that you have a unique journey, perspective, story, really. Part of the reason why I'm wearing my shirt, I got my C'est la vie Paris shirt,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
also have my,
I
my
saw that.
African pendant.
I saw
So
that.
yeah, so I got to represent both sides because
I
you
love
have, African roots, French roots, and I
Mhm.
really just wanted to dive into your story real quick. I remember there was one day I was walking down Wynwood and I saw you sitting there with a friend of yours. I think she was visiting from out of town, and I
Mhm.
overheard the two of you speaking French.
Oh,
So,
yeah, it was with Zoe. That's crazy. Yes, it was
right.
with Zoe. So Zoe and I met at school, but she lives in Paris. She fully like works and lives in Paris, and we could have easily spoken English to each other, but yeah, speaking French was just a lot easier, and
Yeah.
it helped me remember the language as well. I think that's another big portion about this experience is trying not to lose your sense of self that is
Oh yeah.
found within multiple places, you have to do work in order to not lose those things, as opposed to it just being constantly funneled into you. So yeah, I definitely opted to speak French to my friend
Oh
while she was
definitely.
down. But
Do you ever feel like, are you like me where you're speaking French to other French speakers and you're almost like insecure? You're like, look, you about to judge my friend.
of course, like I
Yeah.
always like because so there's little nicknames, right? So to my African cousins that live in Africa, me and my sister were like the petit Parisiens, like the little Parisians, right?
Yeah.
It's my cousins that live and have been living in Paris. They call us the petit Americains, the
Yeah.
Americans. And so there's always like a little bit of like, ooh, do I fit in? Am I speaking right? Am I hitting my accents enough? And as you know, French in from an African perspective is a
Oh
different
yeah.
sort of French as opposed to the hard, kind of harsh French that is spoken in
For
Paris.
sure.
So I had a college roommate she's a francophone, loves France, actually married a Frenchman, and now is like
Okay.
living her heart's desire in her French family. But I remember her telling me when we were college freshmen rooming together, and I would talk to my mom about a basketball game or whatever, and she's like, "Oh, I just love the African French accent." And I
Mm.
never knew anything different because I grew up with my mom just speaking French to us.
Yeah.
And I have not really been immersed with the hard Parisian France as much.
Yeah.
French, excuse me. And she was like, no, it's just smoother. It's just a little bit. And I was like, and I started picking up when I visited France. I was like, you're right. The French, the African speak is a little bit like as if it was almost like a Southern accent.
Yeah. It just
More
flows.
roomy, it flows. It's a little bit thicker. It's a little bit just like more warmth around it,
Yeah.
as opposed to like if you speak French like with the hard accent, it's like, well, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not gonna try either. It's just like a little, it's a harsher one. And so anytime you can try and practice, you're just a little bit self-conscious. Like, do I
Oh
sound
yeah.
like my African cousins? Do I sound like somebody that's from Paris? You try to up the accent a little bit, get your
Yeah.
conjugations right. It's a mess.
No, definitely. I was speaking French with one of my friends who's Canadian. She's French Canadian,
Oh,
and
and
she
that's a
said,
whole different one.
"No, it is completely different." And we probably spoke for like 15 minutes, and after that, we just went back to English. And she said, "Look, that entire time, I felt like you were judging my French," and I was like, "Oh, I was, but it's all right."
That's hilarious. That's crazy.
But look, I would love to hear just the story of either you, your family. How did you all get to the United States of America?
Yeah, that's a long one, but I'll start with just my family.
Okay.
Essentially, both my parents are West African from Guinea, Conakry, and Guinea Conakry is a French colonized country. They got their independence in the 1950s,
Mhm.
but they still speak French heavily there. And there's tons of Guinean people that emigrate to France because of the language is already there, et cetera. And so that's essentially what my parents did, and that's where they met in France. And had my sister, my older sister, and I. And my father, had a good eye. He was in economics and finance, and he had a good eye for our future. And he told my mom, "Hey, I think it's smart if you bring the girls to America. It'll be good
Mm.
for their education. It'll be good for their generation growing up." And he called it because if you see Europe right now, financially, not doing great for our generation.
Right.
So yeah, so we moved. I was about 4 or 5, my sister about 7 or 8.
So y'all were born in France.
We were born in France,
Okay.
yes. And so we moved, and I think the timing of this is very important because we moved before 9/11. And if you
Mm.
move before 9/11 to America, it was a lot easier to become what we
A
call a
citizen.
legal resident.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Not a citizen, so a legal resident. So that meant you got a social security card, you paid taxes, you were very much legal for the sense of the country knew you were there, but you weren't a citizen. And then 9/11 happened. And now to be able to get into schools, to be able to do
Yeah.
anything, you needed to be a citizen. And that kind of changed a lot of things for our family. But anyway, so we moved to the States. It was just my sister, my mother, and I, and my father would go back and forth. 9/11 hit, things changed. We were legal
Mm.
residents. He was not. And he was not allowed to come back into the country as easily. And that distance and that strain ended up separating my parents. And so it just ended up
Oh,
being
wow.
my mother, myself, and my sister in North Carolina, where we first landed because I had an aunt. Very much the immigration story, right? You go to a city, some town, somewhere random where there's a
Yeah.
family that are already
Yeah.
established.
You know what's funny? Charlotte, North Carolina was the first place we went because we had an uncle whenever we came here.
Look at that. Wow. Look at that. Small world. So we were in Raleigh. And I pretty much grew up there. We didn't go anywhere and we didn't go back to France back and forth. I think I came when I was 4, 5. I did not go back to France until I was 17
Wow.
because of this whole immigration aspect. I had not become a citizen until then. And so was able to go back then. So it was interesting. I think because I was the youngest, I was kind of bubbled off, and I came so young that I definitely had my experience as like, I knew I was kind of a third culture kid. I
Yeah.
was born in a place that wasn't home because I wasn't raised in France, in Paris, France. So I was born in this one place. Then I was raised by another place. I was raised by West African Guinean culture in
Yeah.
my mother and my aunts and the people we knew. And then I was growing up in the American South.
Yeah.
So here I was existing at the nexus of these three cultures, trying to understand, Mom, why can't I go to sleepovers? Or trying to understand why there was such an emphasis, oh, my friends don't have to clean their rooms to this degree. Why do I have to do it? Right? And it was a very, very confusing. My identity, I think that was probably the number one thing I struggled with growing up was my identity. It's just like, who am I? And I kept trying to put on masks for everyone else. And, one of the biggest things why I was so good at school and extracurriculars and things of that sort was because my mom taught us, don't be a problem. And that's very much an immigrant mindset of like, you don't want anyone to question why you're here. And you don't want anyone to question why they let you come.
Yeah.
Right? So you just go to school, do what you're supposed to, be respectful, be the model student, friend, everything. And that could be a lot of pressure for a young person. And that's what I experienced kind of growing up. And it was actually the perfect segue for why I majored in anthropology at Yale, because I finally learned the vocabulary, the studies around culture. And understanding why I struggled so much growing up is because I had 3 strong, loud cultures dictating my lived experience every day. And I had to battle going outside my home to my Southern American school that valued sports and valued athletics and academics, sort of. And then having that American dream type of experience, and then coming back home to an immigrant household where it was like, stay low, be like, don't be as loud as this American dream is telling me to be. And then there was also these like food things that came from France, like, not eating too much, wanting to remain thin. Like, I mean, it wasn't until I got to college that I realized, oh, this is making so much sense. This is why I grew up the way I did. But yeah, so that's how we ended up here. We stayed in North Carolina for the entirety of my like young life. And then I went to Yale, and my mom kind of packed up and left North Carolina, my sister was already in New York, followed us up north so that she could come to my basketball games and be around my sister. And then she came back to North Carolina after all of that was done. And when COVID hit, my sister was in Vegas, I was in California. And we realized, Mom, you don't really have a reason to be here anymore. Your family, your friends, everything is in France. So we packed her up. And at the beginning of COVID, she moved back to France.
Oh, she moved back?
Wow. Yeah. So now I have more reason to go back to France. I definitely will be back more often. I went during the pandemic. I have a French passport. I have an American passport. Yeah. So yeah, that's our experience. I don't know if I fully wrapped that up, but yeah.
No, that's wow. There's so much to dive into there, right? And I know we have a limited time, so I got to be respectful. You literally went and basically studied some of this whenever you went to Yale, and looked at culture and looked at your heritage. I don't think people fully realize just how the process of getting here and doing the paperwork and proving that you really deserve to stay there because, you know, luckily, I mean, for us, we did most of that in 1999 and 2000. And I can imagine what it was like for people who had to do it post 9/11. And, you know, and, oh my gosh. Yeah. You know what? For whatever reason, I never even thought about that. Maybe just because it wasn't part of my lived experience.
Right.
But, you know, so as you're going through this entire identity kind of crisis, and did you ever feel like, hey, I need to look deeper into this? Or was it more like, look, I'm just going to code switch, or I'm going to, you know, speak differently around different people? Or, you know, what was that like just as a kid trying to figure that out?
Yeah, as a kid, I don't think I had the depth to understand that this was bigger than me, and there's something that needs to be unpacked here.
Yeah.
So it very much is a survival kind of mentality. And I think what added on top of that, like, not only are you an immigrant in the American South, you're a Black immigrant in
Double
the
discrimination.
right? Yeah. And then you're a single mother child, right? From a single mother home. So you think about all of what that can, what judgment someone could come up with in their mind.
For sure.
Hearing that you're an immigrant, you're a Black African immigrant in the American South, and you're the product of a single mother home. It's a lot. And then you think about what's one of the biggest things in African culture is appearances.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's all about what you portray and what you show to the world,
Absolutely.
what you do to the world, right? So I'm thinking, as a little kid, I look around, I'm observant. I watch American movies. I watch American music videos. I watch the way that people, so I'm already picking up, oh, these people don't like immigrants. I want you to speak their language, speak English, right? I'm hearing that. I'm hearing, oh, Black single mother, welfare, all these different things that we weren't on welfare, but I'm already scared that anybody thinks I'm on welfare, right? And that was already a negative thing for me to think that as a kid, that welfare means you're a bad person, and that you're taking advantage of the system, just from what I've seen, right? And I don't know any, and as an African person we don't know these systems. We just know that people mirror these systems onto groups of people, and these judgments based off of these systems onto groups of people. So I'm like, okay, what can you do to keep up appearances that, despite being an immigrant, despite being an African immigrant, and despite being the product of a single mother home, you're doing just fine. Get straight A's, be the captain of every sports team you can be on, join as many after school activities, clubs, be friends with everyone, jump around in different friend groups, code switch, know every song, rap, hip hop, emo, classical, you name it, just be cool. Everybody's gonna know Zena's cool. Like, I can bring her around my parents. They're white, we don't care. They're this, we don't care. She's cool with everyone. And that was what I did for as long as I could remember. Well, I was 18. Was just like putting this weight on of just like fit in, just try and fit in. So I did not.
It's so funny. No, as you're talking about this, it's almost like listening to my own story, right? Because although I never felt like I code switches, I felt like I just understood how to communicate to different groups of people and having cultural competence. It's whenever we first came to Irving, Texas, we would tell everybody that we were French. Like, we didn't tell anybody that we were African. Right? So because we spoke French and we knew that Americans had negative stereotypes of African people, we were like, oh yeah, no, we're not from Africa. We're from France.
Yes.
Right. While we're in ESL classes with the kids from Mexico, with the kids from Asia, like, no, we're from France. And I had my best friend was from Sudan. He was the African. I was the French kid. And then it wasn't until, just a couple years after that, probably when I was 12 years old, that I was like, man, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, I'm African and I'm proud of being African. And you know what the thing was? Whenever I had some of my friends come and eat lunch at my place, like during the summer, and then they ate fondue, they ate poisson salé, they were eating some fufu, and they used their hands. That was the game changer for me. I was like, oh, they like it. You know what I mean? Like, they don't think it's nasty. They don't think it's anything. And that's when I was like, I can be my full African self.
Yeah,
So
I'm so jealous. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of your 12-year-old self because I can't tell you how much I did to keep people from my home. I didn't want anybody to come and feel like I was just so nervous about like would they like these curries that my mom makes, or would they
yeah,
think, I mean, our house was immaculate. My mother kept our house immaculate. It smelled great. It was amazing, blah, blah, blah. But I knew what people thought of Africans. Like, I didn't want them to think our house smelled or it wasn't good enough or, whatever it was. And God, I just feel for my 15, that I feel for little Zena because I was so worried for no reason.
yeah.
But I do want to go back to that point about French versus African because I definitely played up the French way more than I played up the African. And yes, we were actually born in France, right? I actually have more of a connection to France than Guinea. I've never been to Guinea even to this day. So like
you plan on going back?
What'd you say?
You plan on going to
Guinea?
Guinea?
I definitely plan on going back for sure. I've definitely planned on going back. But for growing up, I hadn't gone, so I didn't really know anything about Guinea to even try and claim it. But I knew that my skin looked like this because I was Guinean, not because I was French. But I knew that saying French was more exotic. It was sexier. It was more acceptable. And I hate that I fed into that. But now I'm like, yes, it's a cool thing to be African now.
Hey,
like,
right. Everything is so Afrocentric. But look, in 1998, African booty scratcher. That's what.
Yes.
I don't know if they said that in North Carolina, but definitely around here in these parts, it was all that. And then all of a sudden, it's cool. Everybody wants to be African again, right? It's almost like going back to the 80s when it was cool to be African, and now 2010s on, it's cool to be African again.
Oh yeah. I will go ahead and say shout out to Nigeria because they really helped that train on a global scale. But I will say too, I want to talk about your experience. Maybe one of the reasons, and this is just a hypothesis, I think young boys are way more accepting than young girls. And I think it's part of the reason why some of my best friends growing up were boys. But I think they're just way more accepting and way more willing to be like, no, I don't care. Like, yeah, it's cool. It's whatever. And maybe girls are just as accepting, maybe. But I think we are way more self-conscious than boys to test that theory, right? So I feel like I might have had the same experience had I not been so self-conscious as a young girl and tried to expose more of my friends to my experience as an African person. Yeah. My girlfriends may have been actually just as accepting as your guy friends, but I feel like boys are kind of like, they don't care as much, right?
Just more easygoing,
more easygoing. And so I think that might have fed into your experience being able to find that sooner. But that's just a theory. I don't know. But I would be very...
Look, it was really interesting because, kids are cruel, right? So you're hearing all the jokes still. I'm the African student that just came in, but I'm firing back at them. And I'm like, look, all the racial jokes, I'm throwing it at them. They're throwing it back at me, and we just going. And that was almost like how we bonded.
Right. See, that didn't, in the women's world and a young girl's world, no way. Because those are fighting words.
Yeah.
Well, right. And that was the number one thing my mother told me, we're not getting in fights. We don't do that.
So speaking of fighting words, right? And I touch on this in my book, really up until I was about 15, 16, because I struggled with like really processing the whole identity piece. Anytime that somebody said something that was, that just like triggered something that was racially or even like back to my heritage, I just got in fights with people. Like that's all we did, we fought. And it was especially prevalent whenever I was young, before I knew the language that well, because I wasn't fluent in English till I was 9 years old. So before that, I hear them making fun of me. I can't defend myself. So I'm like, look, I'm just going to beat you up. and that's what it was.
Okay.
It's like growing up, it was very, being able to express yourself, or the lack thereof, not being able to express yourself was interesting. So whenever you went to the Ivy League then, what was that experience like? Because you're learning more about the culture. Are you still going through the identity piece, or is it, okay, you see in maybe more people who are part of these different cultures as well, and you're able to relate to that? How was that for you?
Oh, the Ivy League is such an interesting conversation when it comes to the Black diaspora.
Yeah.
1000% still on the identity piece.
Okay.
I did not have a breakthrough, I don't think, until after college. I think maybe my senior year of college.
Okay.
Junior to go senior year is when I finally had a breakthrough about my Blackness in general, because there was it was very distinct growing up that yes, I was Black, but I was other within the Black community.
Wow.
There weren't many other African kids within our little group, small Knightdale, North Carolina, of where I went to high school, et cetera. And if they were African, they very rarely were born in those respective places. They were the kids, the Americanized kids of African immigrants. So it was a little different. Like everybody knew, this dude or this girl was Nigerian or Ghanaian or whatever.
Yeah, but he grew up in Kentucky.
He grew up here. They've known him since they were in, preschool. So they don't see like, oh yeah, so-and-so's parents are African, but he with us, like, or they're with us. So it's not the same as like, oh, we don't know you. Where are you really from? We don't know your people like that.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think that was like, that had started at a very young age of like, you're Black, but you're not all the way
asterisk.
Black. Right, asterisk. And then on top of that, the Oreo, right? You're the Oreo. You're white inside. It's like, I don't know what we want me to do. I learned English from flashcards.
Right.
From flashcards and watching movies and things of that sort. So it's like, yes, I speak proper English because that's how I learned. But you say that to someone that speaks Black English vernacular or African American English vernacular, things I learned through my anthropology.
Ebonics.
Exactly, essentially Ebonics, right? That we now know as Ebonics. But like, you tell someone that they're not speaking correct English, that's offensive, right? So you talked about cultural competency. It was kind of like, all right, let me code switch here. And it was actually more code switch to be speaking Ebonics, or to be more technically right, Black English vernacular, than to speak white.
Proper. Wow.
Proper, right? I was actually code switching the other way more so than anything. My God, some of my old Facebook statuses, I was trying here. But
wow, that's the first time I've ever heard that. Like whenever I try to speak more Black, that felt like code switching. That
was more code switching for me growing up. I was trying to sound like you don't have any sort of influence to know how to speak Blacker. So it's like, and we weren't allowed to watch Martin growing up. We weren't allowed to watch a lot of things that would have probably taught me a little bit more of, things that I eventually learned when I became friends with all these people and got to know their families, and it became more natural for me to talk like this.
Yeah.
So anyway, when I got to school, there were African people there. Then there were African American people there.
Right.
And those students were these are some of the smartest people in the world, right? They were so aware of their Blackness. It was intimidating. It was highly, highly intimidating. I'm coming in as an athlete who's already intimidated and insecure about the fact that she's an athlete at an Ivy League school.
Yeah.
I'm trying to prove I deserve to be here just as much as you do. I'm just as smart as you. I didn't just get in because I'm only an athlete.
So all the insecurities just
right. So I'm already dealing with that insecurity. And then I see these Black people that have started foundations and created gardens in their New York boroughs for Black communities, and started mentorship programs for the Black underserved youth. All these things that are go Black people. And I'm like, I am not good enough. I'm not Black enough yet. I don't know this stuff yet. And it was a long process. I remember I think it was my senior year, I wrote an article for the Yale Daily News magazine about Black hair, and talking about, I wore my hair straight all through college, my natural hair. Sometimes I wore extensions, and I talked about all that experience of why I do that and why I'm still scared to wear my natural hair. And after I wrote that article, I'd worn my natural hair out, and everyone was like, "Oh, it's so cute, it's so nice, it's so this, whatever." And it was just a reminder of like the world I lived in as an athlete at Yale was very different than this Black group at Yale.
Yeah.
And by the time it was like junior, senior year, trying to enter that world seemed disingenuous
Wow.
because I hadn't come in as a freshman, like at the AFAM house every day and like
Uh-huh.
hanging out with and doing the different things every single day. I definitely made Black friends at Yale, don't get me wrong. And I have great Black girlfriends and guy friends from Yale for sure. But would I say that I feel like I'm a part of the Black community at Yale, like the things that were on campus and things like that? I think I missed that. I missed that opportunity
Yeah.
because I was intimidated.
Yeah.
Sure.
After, whenever I started my professional working life, I had a roommate who was a Black Ivy League graduate. And he was very big on just the community. He would fly people down from up north.
Okay.
He had that same person that you just described, right? That's a part of every club, that's leading all these things. And he was also an immigrant. In fact, he's on another one of my episodes. If you're listening, go check out the episode with Colin. And he talks about all these different things, but he was always very hyper aware of the Black experience in Ivy League and how different that is, for Black students. And he started talking to me about it. We started having these conversations. I'm like, really? I never would have thought. So he created a club just called like Black Ivies, and it was all of them just like mixed together. And he was actually one of the first people that started showing Black travel, right? Like Black travel on Instagram and things like that. Yeah. So now his company is, it's thriving from that standpoint. But now that's just an area that I never really thought to look into. Until I started having those conversations with him. And honestly, now, I would never even be able to tell. Like, I think I've told you in the past, like you walk into a room, you just like exude like a presence.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. It took work. It definitely took work. And, speaking about that Black experience at an Ivy League, you played at OSU, so you know what it feels like. Being a regular student at a school, any school, Ivy League or not, is very different than being an athlete at that school.
Oh, for sure.
Very different. And the athlete world so I had an athlete Black experience at Yale. And that was a whole nother thing because at that point, your Blackness isn't considered in the same way that it would be as a normal student.
That's so true.
Because most of these normal students and we, at our school, we call them normies, but the normies at Yale that were Black and African or African-American, whatever, their contribution to the school sometimes had something to do with their Blackness.
Right.
Yeah. My contribution to Yale was not predicated on my Blackness. It was predicated on my athlete, like being an athlete.
Which honestly, you know what? That seems a little unfair, right? It's like, my contribution has to be based on my Blackness. But I mean, I get it. That's the way,
Right. And I don't want to put anybody in a box. Black people did way more than Black at Yale, right? Yeah. Right. But in the sense of like, my experience, I had to deal being Black as just a Black female athlete at Yale, which there weren't many, right? I had one of my really close friends, Adrian, was the only Black girl on her lacrosse team and was the captain. And I always was fascinated, and she told me, she grew up at a high school that was predominantly white. So that experience wasn't too crazy for her, but she was well aware of what it meant for her to represent that position. At Yale, there's only one captain. You vote one captain in. And she was, I think, the first Black captain of the women's lacrosse team at a year when there was only white teammates of hers. So again, she had a very different experience. I had a different experience just because we were not only Black at Yale, we were Black athletes at Yale. So I think that's a very unique experience in itself. I think about my girlfriend, Bria, who is a well-known activist, worked on the Women's March, has done a million pieces around Black women for Elle and Essence and you name it. And she went to Yale with me, and her experience and her wife's experience as Black normal students at Yale was very different than mine. And it makes sense. I mean, Bria's entire existence, not entire existence, but most of her existence is around activism and fighting for people, underserved communities and things of that sort. And I feel as if I wasn't playing a sport, I might have been in that same position because of the
Right.
Black experience at Yale. So because my senior year, I was way more vocal about being Black at Yale, way more vocal about how I was treated when I would go out socially, how if I changed my hairdo, my professors wouldn't recognize me. I mean, crazy stuff that you experience in white worlds everywhere, but like specifically at Yale.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, those development years are so big. And I think that it shapes you to who you are now. And I
for
think
sure.
especially so my experience was in 2014 after Mike Brown got killed in Ferguson. I had so many of my white friends reach out to me and they say, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this, right? I want to talk to you about the Black experience in America and all this stuff." And I'm like, "Yo, am I the only Black friend y'all got?" Yeah, they all want to talk. But I remember specifically, it was one of my friends who said, "Hey, you're the most well-rounded person that I know, and I want to know just your thoughts on this." And I remember hearing those words and thinking to myself, "Am I really the most well-rounded person that you know? Or is it that my life experience has really caused me to be a part of all these different circles? Whereas you went to a school in the South, you played golf, now you're a professional golf player. If you wanted to go your entire day and only talk to white males, you probably could. That has never been a part of my experience, right? If I want to actually elevate or accelerate in the work world, I have to understand the predominantly white culture as well, right? So I'm like, so being able to explain all these things to him, and then he comes back to me and he's like, "I never thought about it that way. And you know what? Yeah, I do have a certain amount of privilege that existed my entire life that I never even thought about." But, I think that's almost where our experiences are of service now, especially after the summer of George Floyd, happened in 2020. And now you're able to have these conversations that probably have a little more depth because it's not just, the Black experience, but a lot of times it's the immigrant experience that you can kind of come from, and think about as well. So now being in the sports industry and in the industry that you're in, do you find yourself having to, speak out more or educate more people just about, experiences, diversity, equity, inclusion?
Oh yeah, especially now that I feel more confident in my Blackness. I understand the complexities to my Blackness. I understand the implications of my Blackness in certain rooms, in certain conversations. I am well aware of the weight I carry now. Whereas before I had no idea how to carry it or what it was.
Wow.
Right. So I definitely find myself being the person that needs to speak up. And I will say, I find myself being the person to add things that people might think didn't need to be added.
Yeah.
For example, just to help expand people's minds. For example, the other day I was in a meeting at work, and we were talking about words and how words matter. And I work at The Athletic. I work in sports media, publication, journalism, right? And we, as a company, value our journalism in that it's long form, it's real, it's authentic. And we were talking about how important it is to quote people properly. And something that was being discussed was, if somebody is talking and they're giving an interview and they're like, "Yeah, they're gonna do this to us, but we ain't gonna do that to them," are you gonna write out "gone" like GON apostrophe? Or are you gonna fix it to what it's supposed to say?
Going to,
right? And the conversation was being had internally with some of our writers. Like, do you guys keep it apostrophe, like with the vernacular, or do you keep it like an authentic, or do you like change it? And The Athletic was like, "No, you're going to keep it as what they said. And if that's the English vernacular they use, that's what they use. And, we write curse words. We do all that." And so it was a group of white men talking about it. And I was like, as someone that studied Black English vernacular and did a whole thesis on it at Yale, I appreciate that The Athletic makes sure to quote Black players the way that they speak, in the way that their families, whatever. They were all like bantering. I threw that in there. Nobody said anything. And the conversation quickly shifted. And I was like, y'all don't think about that. Y'all gonna think about that.
But y'all gonna think about that.
But y'all gonna think about that. I don't think we're gonna
be
say
right.
gone. We're gonna say gone. Okay. I'm gonna bring it back to the corner. Y'all gonna think about that. And so I have found myself doing that, Where I'm in conversations with white people or non-Black people, and we're talking about things that are adjacent to the Black experience. Because let's be real, when they were talking about we keep things authentic, we know who y'all talking about.
Right.
We also cover sports. We know who y'all talking about. Most of
Right.
our athletes are.
Black.
So we know what we're talking about. But because they don't want to get all the way in there, I'll go ahead and do it. I'll go ahead and say what we need to say.
Yeah. Hey,
And
green
yes,
light. Let me just go in.
go ahead. And I definitely think the George Floyd, Breonna, like Ahmaud, the list goes on and on and on. But all of the lives that were lost, opened up a world for me to be like, y'all can't speak no more, but I'm going to say this. I'm going to say it. And of course, I'm going to be professional about it. But I'm going to push the envelope a little bit here and make sure that y'all hear what y'all are saying and what you're not saying.
Food for thought.
And I feel like it's almost like my responsibility, because I've always, regardless of my insecurity, regardless of my imposter syndrome, have always felt comfortable talking and speaking up. And so, yeah, I definitely drop in little tidbits here and there, whether it's about explaining, like if someone's talking about a golf trip and I'm like, oh, I've never golfed. It's not really something my family does. Like, and this whole conversation's about golf, and you don't even realize that you've excluded, if there's 3 Black people in the room looking at the statistics,
right,
you probably have excluded a portion of them.
Golf. If we're talking about hockey, sometimes baseball.
Hockey, right,
I'm like, look,
right. And it's not even just like a sport, but like if you're talking about your house in Tahoe or your house in Jackson, Wyoming, and things of these sorts, you got to be mindful. Right? You got to be mindful. And what does that require? That requires you to do a deep dive of the access and the privilege and the experience, the lived experience that you've had in comparison to other people in the room. And so I will be the person to drop that moment of reflection.
I love it.
In a way that like is professional and that people aren't completely put off by me because we want to all work together, but in a way that it's like, I never thought of that.
I'm not here to be offensive. Just, hey, let me just sprinkle this in there real quick. Make sure that you understand.
I've actually, I don't know if you do this because, we're on social media these days hard, but I have actually, not from a professional standpoint, but from a personal standpoint, I have actually started to look at certain like people's social media. And if I'm looking through your social media and you don't have a single like if you're a person that is not, if you're not Black, or even if you're just a white person and you don't have a single person of color on your highlight reel.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? So,
I'm not going to say I'm not going to say you're a racist or anything like that, but I do have some questions because it goes back to your point about in order to get through life, you don't have to go out of your way. To encounter, befriend, etc.
So can you empathize?
Correct. As a person that had an African upbringing, a French upbringing, an American Southern upbringing, I had to. So if you like see my friend group, it's very diverse, and I value that. And I think that that's 1000% a reflection of being an African immigrant that grew up in America. But it's like I place value on someone else going out of their way.
I was joking. I was joking with a friend of mine. Who he's a politician, so I can't mention his name because he is very much politically correct. But he was like, "Look, I go to white folks' pages and I be looking for the black square, from 2020 to black square." And he said, not to say that the black square, means that you are or you aren't racist or whatever. He said, it gives me at ease a little bit.
It does. It does. It's very true.
I thought that was so funny because I didn't post the black square whenever the whole thing happened. I was like, look,
I didn't do it myself either. I didn't think it was my responsibility to. But no, I'm very grateful. I think, oh my God, I think for our identities, what happened last summer was like like, I am so happy that I can now feel very free and candid about my lived experience as a Black
right. Isn't that crazy how it was kind of liberating to say like, oh, let's talk about this thing openly.
Yes, yes, because it's not, I think it was very important for me to be able to talk about, you know, people were, during that time, people were like, can you come on and speak as a Black person in America, blah, 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 or like, and they kept saying African-American woman.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, you can say
American.
Black.
And I was like, I don't want to disrespect or take the space of someone that is actually African-American,
Right.
whose family actually had that history and lineage within the United States. I don't want to do that. I am Black. I am American. I am a Black American woman, but I also have African lineage and French lineage. And I want to make sure that I'm not taking someone's space in that regard. And that's a whole nother conversation.
Oh yeah, because I know plenty of people who are Haitian, Trinidadian, and they ain't African American. So you can't just put everybody, you know, a blanket label on all of us, right? And say,
and exactly. And that's why I think I think that what happened was so liberating is because there was this conversation around the diaspora and being able to see, you know, people, for example, at the Warriors, one of the books that were recommended amongst like groups of people talking about things to read was Ta-Nehisi Coates's Between the World and Me. Yeah. And in his book, he describes the Mecca, right, Howard, and crossing the yard and just the variety of Blackness. Yeah. And that, I mean, that passage is so rich in the way that he describes Black people and the way that he describes the different types of Black people. And you can see in that one passage, it's very clear. There's not just Black Americans that are African Americans. There are Black Americans that are from these Caribbean nations, that are from across the ocean, that are from everywhere. And I'm grateful that unfortunately what happened did allow people to see that sort of description of Black people, to know that there's different levels to this.
I love that. Yeah, because we're not a monolith, and one of the things it's one of the things that I touched on my book, and I quoted Marcus Garvey, and I quoted Patrice Lumumba, and I had to go to Mobutu Sese Seko, as well as Martin Luther King Jr., right, and talked about so many, at least 12 different topics that related to one, being an immigrant, being Black, and just all the depth that goes into that. But I feel like everything that you said in here, Z, is just going to open up a lot of minds, and this is why I wanted to have you on here. So thank you so much for agreeing. Appreciate you being here. And
I just want to say, Yves, like everyone.
Oh, hold on. You just said the S.
Like, I know. I was transitioning and I was about to say something else.
Oh, yeah, you try to skate through that.
I was like, Yves, you know, and then I said,
call people out.
You know, I'm sorry. Yves, you know, what you're doing here is so important, because I think there's still levels to this conversation that need to be accessed, not only by non-Black people, but Black people ourselves need to have this conversation. I'm excited for the growth of what this conversation can be, of like understanding that there's different lived experiences within the Black experience, and that we have more in common than we think we do, right? And so I think these conversations that you're having is just so important, and it was really, really lovely to be able to kind of reflect on it today. I got some things I want to talk to my sister about too. I want to hear what her thing was too growing up. But thank you so much for writing this book. I'm very excited to get my copy. And then also just opening this conversation for so many people. It's super important.
Yes, man. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And definitely go talk to your sister about it, because whenever I started talking to my family as I was writing this book, so many more things opened up that I didn't even think that I could, that I was able to grasp, right? And I had to put that in the book as well. So whether that has to do with mission trips, and my outlook on mission trips actually changed, right, as I wrote about it.
Sure.
So a lot happened while I was writing it. Okay. Again, hey, you're the best.
And we get to see all that in the book.
Oh, it's in there.
Oh, good. Yeah. I'm excited.
Good evening.